if you're going to get into a solvent tank, especially for any amount of time, do yourself a favor and get some gloves on. This solvent is not necessarily good for your skin. While it does a good job of cleaning, your skin can absorb some of these chemicals. And I mean, I'm not a doctor, but common sense tells me that if you're doing something for a while and your fingers start to tingle, maybe it's not that healthy for you. It's just a guess. Hey guys, welcome back to the JPM Performance channel. Today we are going to be talking about Miata differentials. Now this will also correlate to first gen RX-7s, second gen RX-7s as well, although they have much longer pinions. But today we're going to be focusing on 1.8 Miata. This is a core Miata differential, nothing super special, just straight out of a street car. You can see it's got a little dirt in it, and it's on the outside it's not so clean, but this is how they all start. So what we're going to be doing today is I'm going to be showing you how I like to disassemble and inspect, as well as we're going to be changing the limited slip to this Speedmaster, which I believe, this is Peter Dozman's differential. I believe he called it a torque worm. Came in this box that says Speedmaster differential carriers. Doesn't say much else, but it's a nice looking piece. You can see it's got proper heavy duty hardware, kind of looks like ARP stuff, a really heavy duty case, certainly much heavier duty than what we see with a stock Torsen, which is just a cast iron case, and probably not nearly as good internals. But anyway, let's get right into it. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm disassembling one of these is mark the caps. You do not want to get these caps mixed up front to back or side to side. They are designed specifically for each side. So I just use a punch, and I will make a little punch mark there and there. So you don't have to punch both sides, at least I don't. You really can't screw this up now that this one cap has this double punch mark. So let's get this thing apart. We will not be using these side bearings. We're going to install new side bearings onto the new limited slip. However, I'm going to go ahead and send this Torsen unit back to him, so we'll hang on to those races. These are your adjustment, I don't really know what you call them. They're threaded, and this is how you adjust your backlash on your ring gear, by moving these in and out side to side. It's also how we adjust our bearing preload. I'll show you. You guys will be seeing that down the road on how I do that. So what are we looking for here? We want to make sure that our bolts look good. We don't have any stretched threads. Those look fine. Make sure we don't see any cracks in our cap, and that the threads look good inside. This actually looks like a really nice donor. Everything looks good there. We're going to need to get these, utilize these bolts here for the ring gear. So we'll steel these. You guys ever have one of these push button? I like it, but sometimes when you're hitting on something hard, it pops off. It's a real pain in the butt. See what I'm saying? think it might be time for a new one. There's 3. 4. I think that either, well, it probably is. Yep, it's probably this. That looks like it's worn out right there. Oh well. Okay, the way that I like to remove these is just get a little hammer and just tap, 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 real easy. It'll just pop right out of here, just like that. So we'll put this aside. Actually, we'll put this back into that box so we can return it to Peter. Nothing really to look at here. And our races. Out of the way. Okay. Visual inspection of the teeth. This one looks like brand new. You'll know if you see a problem on your ring gear because there will be wear marks and sometimes even pitting. Well, this one's in really good shape. So we're going to send the ring and pinion off to get rim treated, which is a micro polishing process, but there's no reason to send him one that's not in good shape. So that looks good. Let's get our pinion out of here. So I'm going to do a little experiment with this thing. When you're used to holding a gun one direction all the time, that means that the teeth that are holding on to this are in the same spot. So I think what I'm going to try here is tightening this up or maybe loosening it. Tighten it up just a little bit more. See if it finds another spot. Nope. Well, I know the first thing I'm doing after this is over. Getting a new one of those. I think I just made it worse. Sometimes these will pop right up. Sometimes you have to give them a little. We'll call it persuasion. It's close. Another thing that I'll do sometimes, and you have to be careful when you do this so you don't screw up your threads, I will screw the nut back on just a tick, and I'll use a little bit of a air hammer, push this out, just like that. Makes it nice and easy, but you don't want to screw up your threads. So that's why you put the nut on there. If you don't have your nut on here, there would be a tendency to screw up the end of your threads if your air hammer got off to the side. Then all of a sudden you couldn't screw your nut back on and you'd be wondering why. Okay, Crush sleeve will not be reused. So here's our pinion, so we want to inspect the teeth on it as well. I've actually rebuilt hundreds and hundreds of these differentials, and I can count on less than one hand how many issues I've actually had with these ring and pinions. They're really stout, really heavy duty. Looking good on that. Okay. Let's remove our seal here. Usually you can do it with a pry bar like this. Obviously that will not be reused. So now bearings. Got your little spacer here that goes between your flange and the bearing, which keeps your gap right. So it's pretty rare when I'm rebuilding one of these that I actually change the pinion bearings if they look good. These things get wear hardened, and if the race looks really good and the bearing looks really good, 99.9% of the time I will reuse them, and you will know if there's a problem. It'll be very apparent. You'll see pitting in the balls here, you'll see an issue in the race. These are like almost brand new looking. So we will not be changing the pinion bearings. So we have that stripped out now. So in order to send this off to rim treatment, we actually need to remove this bearing. And you are going to make a bit of a mess when you're disassembling one of these. I just kind of continuously clean up a little bit, but everything will get cleaned anyway, so it won't be a big issue. So actually the first thing I'm going to show you guys, this is a little dampener. You can see how I can move it. There is rubber between this dampener and the actual pinion. Well, in a racing application, that rubber will fail. And when that rubber fails and this thing breaks loose, you will have a vibration that will drive you crazy. So in every racing differential that I build, I remove this. In order to do that, I use this little puller piece that slips under here. Okay, let's go to the press. Okay guys, here we are at the press. We have we're braced side to side here. And I just used this big socket with this little aluminum shim. Get it all lined up. Our hope here is that it's going to pop right off and that the rubber will not stay onto our pinion. It's about a 50-50 shot as to how this will go when it comes to that. But let's keep our fingers crossed and see if it'll pop right out. Oh. Yeah, now we're talking. So this inner sleeve that was pressed on popped right off. Half the time the rubber breaks and the sleeve stays on here. Now if that happens, you have to use a cutoff wheel and being very careful, slice through it, and you can pop it with a, I just use a chisel, and it will slide right off after that. But this can be a little tricky. Fortunately, this one was in good shape. This is actually another sign that this differential is really low mileage. Everything that I'm seeing right now with the bearings looking as good as they do, obviously this rubber's in pretty good shape because it was able to hold on to our inner race and popped off as well. That actually worked out really well. This we will discard because we have no use for this. It's actually also quite heavy. Now, why did they put these on there? They put these on so in a stock driveline, just under normal use, this would absorb some of the driveline harmonics. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to quiet down your driveline. In a racing application, we don't care about that. We care about this not coming loose and also getting rid of this weight. So there's our pinion. Once again, another good sign that this does not have a lot of mileage on it. There's just a tiny little mark here from where the seal has been riding. On a really high mileage differential, you will actually see a little bit of a groove, and you can feel it with your thumb. I can't even feel it on this one, so that one's in really good shape. So our next step is to remove this bearing and the spacer so that we can send this off to rem treatment. Back to the press we go. Okay, once again, I would never suggest that you push directly on this pinion like this. This would be a big mistake because this is steel and this is steel, and this could have a tendency to mar these threads, which is why I keep this nice little piece of aluminum, which you can see has lots of use, sitting right here to act as a cushion in between the two. We will remove this bearing. This can sometimes take quite a bit of pressure. Another good sign, it's good and tight. We've got our inner bearing out, which just looks beautiful. And we have our pinion gear. Now, there is a spacer right here, and they made these in a multitude of different thicknesses. The reason being is so that when this pinion is sitting inside of the case, it has a certain depth that it rides at, so that when it is engaging to this gear, it engages properly. I can tell you this, what I have found over the years, and I have tried and tested and measured a million different differentials and washer thicknesses. These washers are specific to this case. So if you are changing your ring and pinion ratio, make sure that your pinion washer stays with the case. Do not use the washer from your alternate ring and pinion ratio. You need to remove that bearing, install the washer. I'm being redundant here, I'm saying it a million times, but this has to stay with this case. If you do that, your pinion to ring gear engagement will be pretty much perfect 99.99999% of the time. And I know that because I've built so many of these. So that's kind of a critical part here. So let's go ahead and get these packed up and sent down to our rim finisher. So most of you guys won't have something like this, but this is something that some other alternate ring and pinions came in that just happens to fit a ring and pinion perfectly for shipping. However, if you're going to send something down to your rim polisher, do them a favor and don't send it dirty like this. Let's get into the solvent tank and clean these up. So you guys are going to get a lot of tips from me through this process. One of them is going to be, if you're going to get into a solvent tank, especially for any amount of time, do yourself a favor and get some gloves on. This solvent is not necessarily good for your skin. While it does a good job of cleaning, your skin can absorb some of these chemicals. And I mean, I'm not a doctor, but common sense tells me that if you're doing something for a while and your fingers start to tingle, maybe it's not that healthy for you. It's just a guess. So this is just going to be a quick cleanup to get these sent out, just to get the oil off, any extra grease. If you're like me, when someone sends you something and it comes with oil dripping out of the box, it doesn't necessarily make me happy. Okay guys, from here what I'll do is I will rinse off with water and then blow them off really good, and we'll be ready to pack these up. Okay guys, here we go. Now we can load these up into this nice little protective next tip of the day. Don't ship stuff like this. You'd be shocked at the amount of that kind of stuff that I see. Spend some time. You know, obviously the bottom is going to be good, but we don't want this to get damaged. And also, he can utilize this when it comes back to me. So a couple of things I'll use. Any of you that have ever bought anything from Mazda know exactly what this is. This is the weird kind of packing material that Mazda uses to ship everything all over the world, I'm assuming. I'll kind of start with some of this stuff around the edges so that our piece stays centered. And I don't always have a ton of packing material to utilize, but I just happen to have someone that gave me 1 million of these rags. So I will utilize some of these rags, and they'll ship them back to me when it comes back, which you guys will see. But like I say, usually I would just utilize more of this packing material, but I've been shipping so much stuff out lately, it seems like I'm a little low on it. But the key here is to have some room for your main piece to be insulated in here. Because what's going to happen is your shipper is going to take this and they're going to be tossing it all over the place. And they don't care. They're just trying to move boxes place to place. So I will literally, I'll probably just use all these. I'm going to pack this full, and our ring and pinion will make it there nice and safely. And when he opens this up, he's going to be so happy because A, he's got a bunch of towels he can keep if he wants, clean up his car, and B, everything will arrive nice and safe. I tend to over tape things because the last thing that I want to have happen is for this box to break apart and lose our ring and pinion. So let's go print a label and get this ready to ship out. Okay guys, it's time for the restoration side of this little project. Obviously I don't want to send these pieces back to Peter looking like this. And of course they need to be cleaned inside and out. So two-step process on these two pieces here. We're going to go into the solvent tank, clean them both really well, and then we're going to go into the glass bead cabinet and glass bead the outside of this. The only other thing that I file and glass bead is the flange here. Glass beads can get into everything, and so they're obviously going to get into these threads, and we will clean those out afterwards. So let's head over to the solvent tank and glass bead cabinet, and I'll be back and you can see the results. Okay guys, so we did our initial solvent tank and then rinsed off and blown off and then into the glass bead cabinet. So on this case you can see that we have removed all of the loose paint, any surface rust that there might have been, any corrosion, any dirt. Looks really good. We've also come in here and glass beaded this flange. We're going to file this to make sure that this is flat where it goes up into the case. And our pinion flange has also been completely glass beaded. And the other thing that I like to do is I go to the little belt sander and I will let it make sure that this is flat as well. Really easy to see a high spot if you have a bent flange on a little belt sander. So next thing we're going to do is go back into the solvent tank. This is going to go into the ultrasonic cleaner to make sure that all the glass beads come out of all of the holes and get down into all of these little sections. The ultrasonic cleaner really does a good job of cleaning in places that you can't really get to. So let's get to that and then we'll move on to the paint phase. Okay guys, you can see I got the pinion flange all painted, but we don't want paint in our seal area, so we will use a little brake clean on a lint-free rag here. Make sure we get off the paint right where that seal is going to ride, and that is looking beautiful and ready to go. Let's go jump over and paint the main case. Alright guys, while our paint is drying, we're going to get all of our little miscellaneous bits and pieces into the solvent tank and then rinsed off and into the sonic cleaner so we can get these bearings really clean and get all of the grease and oils out of everything and get that all blown off. So that's what we're going to do next while we're kind of waiting for the paint to dry. And we'll just keep the process rolling. Hey guys, here we are midstream on Peter Dozman's differential project. Fortunately, you know, as I get older, I don't remember everything. For all you young bucks, just get ready. Your memory starts to go. Two things. The memory starts to go, the second one I can't remember. So anyway, I got to thinking, was he talking about an alternate ring and pinion ratio? Yes. So I called him, he confirmed it. So what we've got here is a brand new 512 ring and pinion ratio. These are really nice units. Super nitrided, heat treated. These have been working out really good. So I fortunately did not send the original ring and pinion out yet for rim treating. So I can undo this and put the 512 in this box and get it down to get rim treated. So that's kind of our in the middle of our update here. We're gonna have a little bit of a delay, obviously, not for you, but for me, waiting on the ring and pinion to get rim treated. But as soon as I get that back, we will get back to this project. Hang tight.
A little longer than a few minutes later.
All right, guys, here we go. So we've got everything that we need to finally assemble Peter Dozman's differential. So to recap, we have gone through the disassembly process, the restoration of the case process. We have sent the ring and pinion out for rim treatment. We have that back. Everything is cleaned, ready to go. So this part of the video, here's going to be my disclaimer. I have come up with my own way of doing this. You can read through the Mazda factory manual, and I'm sure that will work fine. Over the last 20-something years of rebuilding, rebuilding, restoring, and learning about Miata differentials, this is how I do it. I'm a little surprised that I'm actually gonna make a video about this, because I've got a few tricks here. But once again, here's my disclaimer. This is how I do it. Is this how everybody does it? Probably not. But I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Miata differentials out there running right now with tons of success. So we've kind of gone around how I do the disassembly and inspection. Here's how we do it. This is how I do it. All right, guys, so here we are. We have our rimmed ring gear. We have our rimmed pinion gear. Looking really good. These things come out super slick. It's a micro polishing that really reduces friction on your gears. So step one, what we're going to do here is we're going to get this ring gear warming up. So what I've got, here's what I like to use. Let's get this so you can see. I've used different heat guns over the years. I use this DeWalt one now simply because it uses the same batteries as all of my other DeWalt tools, but it's just a heat gun. So we'll get this baby cooking, and we will get this ring gear starting to warm up. While we're doing that, we're going to take our brand new side bearings. We're going to press them onto this new limited slip. So let's get to that. Okay, side bearings pressed on, looking good. So the next thing I'll do is I'll rotate this 2 slots. Keep it warming up. So now that we're waiting on that still, we have that bearing installed. Now, let's take our shim. This is the shim that came off of the original pinion. This is going to be the right shim. It always is, as long as you keep the shim with the housing. It's always the right shim. Let's put that in place. Make sure that you put the bevel down, because there is a bevel right here in the corner. Bevel goes down, and let's press our inner bearing on. Okay, there we go. There's our inner bearing. So just to show you guys, I actually made this. It's just 2 pieces of pipe that slip over to press that bearing on, and then I use these old races from an old bearing to actually press these side bearings on. So I've got two of these. I'll put one, I'll press this one on, then I'll flip it over and press the other one on. So a couple tools. Sometimes you have to make tools to make things work. Okay, let's rotate. 2 slots. Starting to get warmer. Are you asking yourself, why is he warming that thing up? I'll tell you why. It's so that the ring gear expands ever so slightly and will make it slip onto this cool temperature limited slip very easily. So we have a brand new crush sleeve here. We have our outer pinion bearing. I always put just a little bit of oil on it, and this is just an old quart jug that I drilled a little hole in the top. I'll just dribble a little bit of oil on that bearing just because I don't like to put these things together dry. Rotate it around and stick it on there. The Miatas have these little shims that go between the bearing and your flange. But the next thing to install is going to be the seal here. So I like to use ultra gray. You guys have probably seen these little squeeze tubes from some of my other videos. This is how you literally get every drop of silicone out of one of these squeeze tubes. This is ultra grade gasket maker part number 82194, and you can get these squeeze tubes from a place called Valco, Cincinnati. So can't remember what they call it. It's got tube grip. There you go. There's the information. I don't know if those phone numbers still work or not. I think I got these from just some speed shop, but I've used one for clear silicone and one for ultra gray. Anyway, try not to over explain things to death here. Whenever I'm pressing a seal in, I don't just press them in dry. I put a little bit of silicone around this flange and I'll just spread it around like this. What I think this does is it does two things. Enables the seal to go in a little bit easier because it's got a little lubrication from the silicone. And also once it dries, it can prevent any leaks from happening that you might have if you have an imperfection in your seal. So I'll just work my way around here. I like to put the metal part of the seal flush with the case. So you can just use your finger and feel it. Don't smash your finger. Just keep going around nice and easy until you're just about flush, maybe a tiny bit below. That's the depth that I like to do them at. So I'll just wipe a little bit of the excess silicone off, and that's how I like to install my pinion seal. Like I say, I've been doing this for years and years and years, and this has been the best way that I have found to make that happen. Okay, one more rotation of the ring gear. Oh, she's getting good and warm now. Okay, let's put this off to the side for a minute, and let's get ready to install this ring gear onto our limited slip. Okay guys, what I've got going on here is that I've got my big vise sitting right here. Probably going to move this camera over to this side. So I've got a big vise. I like to put a rag on it like that. We'll set this right over here. Should give you a pretty good vantage point of what I'm doing with this vise. Okay, our vise is ready. Our ring gear is almost ready. Let's rotate it again. It's getting good and warm. We've got our limited slip ready to go. We've got our bolts sitting right here. So I'm going to set my torque wrench for 60 foot-pounds. I don't know if this is the spec exact spec that the book says, but it is what has felt best to me over the years in torquing a lot of these ring gear bolts. So we've got that set to 60 foot-pounds. And then I've got my handy dandy little cordless snap-on impact gun with my 14 on here. So part of the goal here is to be a little bit speedy. We're warming up this ring gear for a reason. So if it cools off too quickly, it's not going to slip over our limited slip very quickly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some red Loctite. I use 262. I will put some on each one of these bolts, a little on the threads and just up onto the shank. Each one. Okay, moving to our ring gear. I'm going to put a drop in between each bolt hole. Just a drop. This creates a flange seal, and it actually can grip between the ring gear and the limited slip quite well. So you can see I've got gloves on because this ring gear is going to be smoking hot. And up she goes. So let's start a couple of bolts and pull this ring gear up into position before this thing cools off. Alright, move quickly. Let's get these bolts in here. Let's get this thing over to the vise and let's get these torqued down. So we obviously don't need to torque this, we don't need to be pushing on this vise super hard, but hard enough to where it's not going to slip, right? Let's go cross pattern. Crisscross. 60 foot-pounds. So then once I get to the end, guys, I'm just going to pop it one more time all the way around. And that's going to be, it's going to be putting just a little bit more than 60 on it, but not much. But this will ensure that we are equally torqued and this ring gear is not coming off. And that Loctite will set up, and that is now part of the unit. So here we are. We've got our limited slip ready to go. All right, we don't need gloves anymore for now. We're not going to need this torque wrench yet. Let's move along. Reposition, reposition. All right, guys. Next step is to install our new pinion with our bearing pressed on and our new crush sleeve. So I've got a couple techniques here. This is the process here that most people have the most trouble with. This crush sleeve, as you will see, has this bell curve into it. It's also about an 1/8 inch longer than it needs to be. So when this gets crushed down, this is going to hold our bearings slightly preloaded. But if we over crush this or under crush this, we can have a bearing issue in our pinion here. So follow along. I use a little bit of anti-seize initially. So we're going to put some anti-seize on our splines to help the flange slip over the splines. we're going to put some anti-seize on our threads to prevent friction for when we are crushing our crush sleeve down. So I think that a lot of people would do this all in one step versus the two-step process that I'm about to show you. So once we have that done, we will slip this. Oh, one more thing. A little bit of oil on our bearing, not much. So this is just like some old 2050 conventional, nothing special. I just use it for a little bit of pre-lube in motors, on bolt heads and things like that. But it does keep these little bearings from being dry. So we've got our anti-seize, we've got our little bit of oil on there. Let's slip this up underneath, up through the bottom. Okay, here's something else you need to pay attention to, guys. This seal can be a little tricky to get sealed up. It actually has a dust sleeve and then the main seal section. So I let this pinion slide down a little ways and work on making sure that your pinion goes into the dust seal and sits flat on that bearing, and then slide your pinion up. From there, we've got a washer. I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize on this washer face. Why am I using this anti-seize on the face? It's to decrease friction. When we have friction and we're torquing something down, you can get a false torque reading simply because you have metal on metal, and that metal running on the threads, if it does not slip easily, you can get a bunch of friction. So if you can imagine pressing something together that is too dry and you can't get everything to go together. If I was to take my hands and dip them in oil, or if anybody, of course everybody has put some lotion on their hands, how much slipperier is everything? So it helps everything to get a proper torque in this fashion. So initially, I'm going to use a large 1/2-inch bar with the right size socket, and I'm going to pull this down pretty close. Sometimes I can get this up against the crush sleeve, sometimes I have to wait until it's in the vise. This one feels like it's going pretty nice. Okay, there I'm up against the crush sleeve. So I'm up against the crush sleeve, but look at this. There's that 1/8-inch play. If you did not tighten that crush sleeve down, your pinion would literally just slam back and forth, and you'd probably make it about 2 laps before your bearings locked up. So here's how we're going to make this happen. We're going to take this and we're going to clamp this in the vise. Make sure you get it nice and flat. So I'm at a little bit of an angle here so that I can get my ratchet on it. In this instance, I'm going to need to tighten this down a little bit extra. Bigger hammer racing. Just because when we're torquing this nut down, we don't want this flange coming loose and the whole differential falling out of the vise. That would be bad. So, step 1 is to actually get this crush sleeve crushed. Now this takes quite a lot of torque, about 200 foot-pounds to initially get this crush sleeve to crush. So I suggest that you use a breaker bar. So I've got this just piece of pipe onto my ratchet. And believe me when I tell you, you will feel it when you have it crushed. So initially, it's not too hard as it's crushing down. But then you'll feel it. All of a sudden you'll hit a wall. Don't keep going, guys. Use your feel. So what we're going to find is now this is going to be a lot snugger to the point where it's actually going to stay up there. So what I like to do to confirm that I have it crushed is I will back this off, and you will see that crush sleeve release and the bearings free up. Just like that. Now, I think that a lot of people would just crush it and call that good. I don't believe in that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this nut back off. Because over the years I have found a very particular torque that works really well. So let's start with getting rid of the anti-seize. So I'm going to take this nut. Well, look at that. I'm just about out of brake clean. Step 2, guys, make sure your brake clean's not empty. I like using these little straws that come with these, mainly because I think it conserves the brake clean a little bit, so you don't use so much. And it also directs it right where you need it to go. Okay, so we're going to spray that really good. And then we'll blow it off. So now I've got all the anti-seize off of that nut. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the anti-seize off of these threads on the pinion. Because now that we have that crush sleeve crushed properly, now what I want to do is I want to get this nut at a specific torque, and I want it to stay there. If you have anti-seize on your threads with a crush sleeve, it's not guaranteed to stay. It's not a solid torque like if you were torquing down an ARP head stud that is solid, because you'd be torquing whether it's a main cap or a cylinder head. You would be torquing a solid cylinder head down against a solid block. Well, this crush sleeve is a never-ending, potentially moving entity that's going to keep our pinion bearings correct. Excuse me. So we have our pinion clean, we have our nut clean. Once again, I'm going to use our red Loctite, and I'm putting more than a drop on here, guys. That's more like 8 to 10 drops, because when I torque this down to this spec, I don't want that nut to move. If this is over tightened, which it would be if we had just slammed it down, it would be too tight. So the spec that I use is 125 foot-pounds. So we're going to torque this down to 125 foot-pounds with red Loctite. Once again, this is what I have found works best. All right. Now, oftentimes, you will find that the bearings are still kind of snug. This one actually has loosened up really well. So that's a combination of having the right torque and having that just little bit of lubrication on those bearings. So this is actually feeling really, really good. That's the way I like it to be, right there, guys. Okay, we are done with this. Let's move along. This is going to be a little tough to see, but I'm hoping that you guys will at least get the gist of what I'm trying to tell you here. move a couple of these cameras so that you can see what I'm doing. So the bearing preload on that pinion was a very important thing. The next very important thing to be paying attention to is your backlash. Now I'm going to admit that this next segment is probably where I would take the most flack from another differential builder based upon how I do some of this by feel versus using actual tools. But if you've been doing it as long as I've been doing it, I think that sometimes doing things a little bit by feel in certain instances, this being one of them, can actually work out better. The reason is because things are constantly evolving. These new side bearings that we just installed will take a little bit of break-in, and so I'm going to probably have them slightly tighter than what the spec would be in the book. However, once this differential is filled with fluid and it gets spun about 5 times, these side bearings just work out perfect the way that I do this. So we have our limited slip and we have our new side bearings. We have our ring pinion installed. This slips in just like this, guys. So side bearings sit there like that. Now remember when we were disassembling, we marked one cap with a mark, so it's not on this side. For some reason, whenever I disassemble these, I always, must be because I do it the same way every time, it always ends up being this cap over here where I put that mark. So we're just going to push these caps on, and we're going to take the bolts and we're going to just slip them in to their threads for now. Just make sure that we've got those working, get those down, and we're just going to snug them up, run them all the way down. Okay, now I will take my ratchet and I will back these off just till they're loose, and I mean just till you can barely turn them with your fingers. Because here's what we have to do next. For me, the next step is to put on my reading glasses. As I've gotten older, I cannot see this anymore. So these are our adjusters, which are threaded. I have not found that it matters side to side which one goes where, because they're fully adjustable. But what we have to do, and I'll get out my light, is we need, this cap will float ever so slightly with these bolts loose. And that's because these were machined, the threads were machined once the caps were tight. So I'm going to line these threads up and thread this in. So just thread it in until you can't really thread it in with your fingers anymore, and then back out a tick, just so you've got some play like that. See how easy that is to remove? Let's go to the other side. Now don't get frustrated. This actually can be kind of tricky to do. Just take your time, make sure you don't cross thread this thing. While making it look easy today. It's not that easy actually, guys. Okay, rotate it in and then back it off to where we've got lots of room. Okay. That's really the only thing that I need these for, so let's get rid of the glasses. Okay, let's snug these all back down. Now obviously, we're not going to leave them like that. We're going to change our torque wrench to 45 foot-pounds is what I like on these. And of course, because we do not want these to be moving, we're going to use a little bit of red Loctite. So here's what I do. I'm going to pull these out one at a time. The other bolt is going to hold the cap firm. I'm going to put a few drops of Loctite on. We're going to roll it back in. Grab our torque wrench. Now you can see I've got this case bolted by this one rib here. This is just to hold this case up so I can work on it. Do not attempt to torque this without holding this differential solid. You will snap your fin off of your differential case there. Okay guys, now we've got our caps torqued down, but these are still adjustable. So here's how they did this. They made this so you can still rotate these even when the caps are down. Okay, I can still rotate that easily. So we will be locking these down in the end, but now what we need to do is we need to set our backlash. What is backlash? Backlash is how much room we have between our pinion gear and our ring gear. So I'm going to start rolling these bearings in a little at a time. Consistently feeling, so you can hear that click, click, click. So there we have some pretty good, it's actually a fair amount of backlash. So I've been rolling. Let me try and explain this a little simpler. Our pinion is sitting on this side in this plane right here. Our ring gear is here. We are going to move our ring gear into the pinion bearing. If we have too much slop here, this will prematurely wear out the teeth, mainly of the ring gear. If it's too tight, if there's no movement here, like if I could not rotate this back and forth at all, that means that our ring gear is too tight into the pinion gear, and certainly when we get out onto the racetrack, things are going to tighten up, and that's going to create excess friction, tooth wear, bearing wear, a lot of extra heat, and all in all just be a real pain in everybody's behind. So we're going to rotate this side in. Now here's where everybody's going to give me the most trouble. I've got this piece of metal that I made a long time ago. You can see it's well used, and I've got a regular vice grip here. This is what I use to snug these bearings up. And I can back this off and I can pull this back down, and what I'm looking for is snug, and I mean good and snug. Not I know a lot of people have asked me, how many foot-pounds would you say that is? Well, on this tiny little vice grip, it's not very much, but it's definitely snug on both sides. So I'm happy with that. That's where I'm going to get the most amount of trouble, but look how easily this moves. Moves real nice. We've got a little bit of backlash. Question is, how much backlash do we have? This is where your dial indicator comes in. So I've kind of got this set to where I can balance it on this main cap here. And then I can rotate the dial indicator to get onto a tooth. So you need to get onto this tooth really as square as you possibly can, so that when we're checking our amount of backlash, it's pretty close to straight on with the tooth. So this is going to be too much backlash, I can tell, just because of the way it feels, but this is a good way for you guys to see what I'm talking about. So there we've got from 0 to 89, so that's 11 thousandths of backlash. While I would always say that it's better to have a little too much backlash than too little, 11 thou, in my opinion, is way too loose for a Miata. In this application, I like to see about 5 thousandths. I will let it go as far as 7 at times, but no tighter than about 4. So I'm going to pull this back 1 slot, and I'll actually go 1 slot and a half, and I will pull this down 1 slot and then re-snug this other side so that the slot is back straight up, and the bearings feel good right there. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we are going to recheck our backlash. Now, you're going to have to kind of reset your indicator each time you do this to make sure that it's square and flush. So initially we had 11. That brought it down to about 8. So we're definitely going to go at least 1 more. Back this side off. One and a half slots. Pull this one in 1 slot. Pull this one back the half slot. Perfect. I'm not going to be surprised if I'm going to need to do 1 more of these. Okay guys, that is right at 6 thou. So while that's not bad, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it 1 more just to see what it does. 1 and a half slots, 1 slot tighter, half slot back. Yeah, and the bearings feel good. So I'm hoping this is not tighter than 4. Just so you know, factory spec on this from Mazda is like 2 to 3 thou. I have found in a racing differential that there's a little bit of horsepower you can gain by loosening it up a little bit. Also, these differentials tend to get a little warmer, obviously, than they would in a street application. And when they do, they expand more, and when they expand more, they can tighten up. So once again, I'm going to stick with the theory of it's better to be slightly loose than it is to be too tight. Okay guys, so that's 3 thou. So for this application, that's a little too tight for my liking. So now we're going to back it up the other direction. So I'm going to go 1 and a half slots back and 1 slot tighter and our half slot back, and it feels perfect. This should take us back to our 6 thousandths number that we're kind of looking for here. Okay. Actually about 5.5. So I'm going to call that just about perfect. Okay, we have set that. Our backlash is looking good. It feels perfect. You have to have this little bit of clunk. If you're ever wanting to check a differential to kind of see the condition it's at, you can just grab the pinion and shake it a little bit, and you should hear that little clickety 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 click. So now Mazda in their genius knew that these rings would be loose when you were done, so they've got these slick little locks. So we can slip this lock into here and tighten that down. Once again, in a differential, I kind of like things to be Loctited. The last thing you want is any of this coming loose, because it's not just going to fall off your car. It's going to fall down into your gears and into your limited slip, and it's just going to make a mess of everything. So these tend to get a little twisted. So once I get that snug down, I'll take my little ball peen and I will make sure that that tooth is engaged into that gear so that gear cannot move. We'll do the same thing on this side. Good and snug. What's the torque spec on that? I don't know, I've done so many of them I couldn't even tell you. Let's do a little test here on the fly. I'm gonna say, so that's only an 8mm bolt. I think about the most I would put on that's about 20 foot-pounds. Yeah. It's 20 to 22. Feels real good. Okay guys, let's move over back to the main bench and I'll show you my final check that I like to look for. Alright guys, here's our differential. I can turn it by hand. Got that nice little clickety click. Looks really good. But that pinion can certainly be engaging that ring gear in a various different number of ways and will still turn. How do we know it's set right? Well, I'm going to show you that, but this is also the reason why we made sure that we used that shim on this pinion that went with this case. These cases all get machined differently, and that pinion shim sets the depth on the pinion because that will allow that pinion to engage or disengage the ring gear. However, if you really want to see what you've got going on, what I use is this stuff called Prussian Blue. It's a non-drying, what's the best way to describe this stuff? It's a layout material is what it is. So when this goes together and you squeeze it down, it gets a lot, it changes colors and it will show you exactly how much or how little the gear engagement is. Probably best if I just show you what I'm talking about. So what I'll do is I will squeeze this alongside this side gear on the ring gear on both sides. Like that. And then I will put a little bit of drag on this limited slip unit by just resting my hand on it, and I'm going to roll this bluing through the pinion. We're going to see how easily it is for us to see exactly what's going on here. Then I'll go backwards a little bit. I want to get a good read on this tooth. This might be a little tricky for you guys to see, but we're going to attempt it anyway. Alright, let's get close. Right on this tooth, we have an engagement depth. So you can see that the bluing did not press itself all the way down into the root of this side gear. That is an extremely critical thing, that your pinion gear is not bottoming into the side gear. If it does, that will for sure wear out your pinion gear much quicker than needed. Now, this may be kind of tough to see, probably impossible to see, but the other thing that we're looking for, there you can see it just a little bit. We want to make sure that our ring gear is not sliding off the edge of that tooth right here. So you can see how it is not engaging this very edge of this tooth. It is starting on the edge and working its way in. You might be able to see it a little bit better right there. See how nice that looks? The other thing is we want it to be engaged fairly deeply into that pinion. So you can see here that it's engaging fairly deeply into the pinion while also not fully bottoming out. So guys, I'm telling you, and it seems strange, I know, if you make sure that you utilize that pinion shim and keep that pinion shim with the case, it works out every time, and it just does. So the last thing that I do here before packing up and shipping to a customer is actually taking a little paint pen here, and I like to write the ratio and what limited slip is in here. So in this case, we've got a 5.12, which is about the shortest rear end ratio you can use. Guys can use it on road courses. A lot of the rotary guys used them. You're going to make sure you need overdrive. If you're going to run a 512, you're going to need a pretty tall, going to need a bit of an overdrive. Peter's using this in his rallycross car, so a 512 is going to give him a lot of good acceleration. So they called this, I know that he called it a torque worm. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a TW. So when he goes to glance at this, he will know that this is not his OS Geiken, but his torque worm, which is kind of a funny name for a limited slip, but it kind of makes sense because a Torsen uses a worm gear style, and this is very similar to a Torsen. So you're transferring torque through the worm. So it's a pretty nice looking piece. You can see here it actually says speedmaster79.com. So it's going to be really interesting for Peter to give us some feedback on what he thinks of this limited slip versus the OS Geiken. I personally have not used one of these torque worms myself. Ran a Torsen, I know some of you guys have probably heard me say this for years. I ran a Torsen back in 2006 and 2007, 2008 in the Miata, and became so frustrated. Now that was with the F production and E production NA Miatas, which had a lot more power than say a spec Miata does, for instance. But I became so frustrated with the way that the Torsen would unlock if I got up on a curb, unlock the inside, that I actually ended up initially taking an open diff and welding it solid, and had a solid locked diff for a year. And then I went to the PRI show and actually saw the OS Geiken, put the OS Geiken in my car, which is a clutch type limited slip, and immediately went like a second faster everywhere I went last year. So the torque worm is a kind of a version of a Torsen. The OS Geiken is a clutch type limited slip, which I really like because you can adjust the clutches, and I've got a lot of experience with those. But it'll be really interesting to see what Peter reports back on this. I'll probably do a little report on that, probably in one of the shop tours. So in the meantime, hope you guys enjoyed this differential process. I know there's a lot to it. I do so many of these, sometimes I might go a little quicker than some people would, but I kind of know what to look for and know what to feel. So if you have any questions about this, feel free to hit me up down below. If you have an opinion on how I did something, that's fine. You can tell me your opinion as well. It doesn't much matter to me, because I'm not going to change the way that I build these. But this is how I do it, and that's what this channel is all about. So I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you guys are having a great day. Thanks for watching, and make sure you subscribe for me so you don't miss any of these videos, because we've always got some new stuff coming down the pipe. Take care, guys.